Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, I guess. Welcome to today's webinar, Genetics and the Supply Chain. I'm Noelle Skadinsky, Editorial Director for Cannabis Business Times and Cannabis Conference. And before we get started, I just want to take care of a couple of housekeeping notes. You will be able to submit questions at any time during the webinar. You'll see the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you could submit your questions there, that would be helpful. And then we'll leave time at the end to address as many questions as we can. Second, the webinar will be archived. So if you have to leave at any time, you'll be able to see it later. And everyone who registered will receive that link via email. And last but not least, I just want to note that the opening rates for Cannabis Conference 2023 do expire this Wednesday, March 15th at midnight. So if you want to save up to $600 on your registration rates, just register by the end of day Wednesday. And we'll be talking about genetics at the conference as well. So join us in person in August in Las Vegas to further this conversation. And you can view the full agenda at cannabisconference.com. So with that, I am pleased to welcome our star-studded panel. Leading the conversation today is Mojave Richmond. He is the co-founder of Bioagronomics Group and director of horticulture and research for cannabis IP company Breeders Best. Mojave's been working in cannabis for more than 3 decades and is known for his development of the award-winning cultivar Sage, which served as a springboard for creating many notable varieties, including one we just heard a funny story about. Maybe you'll share that, Mojave. And along with Rob Clark, Mojave writes the Growing Pains column for Cannabis Business Times, which we're always grateful for. And he's also a frequent speaker at the Cannabis Conference. I'm also pleased to welcome Josh Malman, who is Vice President of Cultivation Operations at Jushi. He has extensive expertise in genetics, cultivation methodologies, and facility design. During his time at Jushi, Josh has been an invaluable part of the company's operations team, creating sophisticated IPs, KPIs, and SOPs, as well as scaling the company's cultivation operations in Pennsylvania, Virginia, Nevada, Massachusetts, and Ohio. Prior to Jushi, Josh worked at the clinic, where he helped grow the business into 3 cultivation facilities and 6 retail stores in Colorado. And he received his Bachelor of Science degree in horticulture from the University of Wisconsin, and also spent a number of years in other agricultural crops, I believe ornamentals, if I'm not mistaken, Josh. Also thrilled to have with us Christopher Levitt, co-founder and chief science officer at Node Labs, a cannabis tissue culture laboratory, phenohunting and plant breeding company, as well as the principal breeder for Compound Genetics, a prominent cannabis seed and flower brand. His experience in tissue culture protocol development for cannabis, poplar trees, wine grapes, berries, and endangered plant species. And he runs a medicinal plant research company called Bliss Biosciences, and alumni of the University of Vermont, where he studied evolutionary biology. And last but certainly not least, a big welcome to Ryan Calamia, the COO and co-founder of Hayes Valley Nurseries. Ryan was the co-founder of Wallflower Nursery and is the co-owner and founder of Radio Ridge Nursery. Ryan started his career some 20 years ago, designing and building grows for home and commercial growers throughout California. And during that time, he collected cultivars from many of his clients, eventually leading to a large cannabis library. While growing and working in the Santa Cruz Mountains, Ryan and his business partner honed their nursery craft. With an emphasis on large-scale R&D, he has provided many new and proven cultivars to the community. They are now one of California's major cannabis nurseries. And he was one of the first to offer a breeder cut along with royalty contracts for the breeders. Through years of collecting, he now owns one of the largest and most unique cannabis libraries. So welcome to all of you. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you, Noelle.
Thank you. Thank you. What's up?
Yeah, thank you. So now with that, I want to turn the mic over to you, Mojave, to get us started.
Thank you, Noelle. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. This is quite a panel we got here, and a subject that I think has a lot of a lot of impact on our industry. So to start things off, I kind of like to hear from all three of you, just your basic ideas and concepts on what are current trends that are driving the market in terms of like cultivar traits, cannabinoids, aroma profile, color, structure of the flower, and stuff like that. So if you could start that off, Chris, if you've got any comments, I'd love to hear them.
One more time, Mojave. Can you repeat the question really quick?
Yeah, it's basically just an idea of what you think current trends are in the market in terms of structure, cannabinoids, color, aroma profile, just like what you're seeing going on right now in your current market.
Absolutely. So I think so we're a really California centric market, but I feel like and we'll talk probably more about this. So many markets kind of look to California to see what is trending there to kind of like mark what their targets are as well. And right now, like Runts is still king, so when you're looking at the actual profiles there, you're looking at large calyx buds, purple expression, kind of what they call candy gas profile, which is really kind of a unique profile, and it's really a gelato derivative. And I think a lot of people love that, but we're still looking at the trends will change, and so we're going to always try to be on that next level of what flavors are in vogue. And I do think a lot of citrus flavors are going to be coming back, like lemon. And lemon cherry gelato runs very similar cuts. Some people say the same, but there's not really that much lemon citrus profile there. I'd love to see more lemon and citrus profiles present in the market.
Brian, what about you?
Hey, speaking to the lemon, that lemon Vuitton from Swamp Boys that Short hunted down in Arizona, that got first place in the myrcene category, and it got the Golden Bear State Fair, and that's 4.2% terps, all lemon. So there is a market coming up for that stuff. I love fruits, man. It's just more fun for me. I love all the berries. I love all the citrus. It's just, don't get me wrong, I do love the gas, but it's also nice to have all those different flavors. Pineapple too, favorite. As far as where the market's going, I think Chris nailed it. We talked about this the other day. It's also what's in the media versus what's actually being sold. I think we talked about the fact that Dread Bread, the sativa, was like 75% of the sativa market. Blue Dream is still huge. There's legal market, there's traditional market, there's what's on media, what's actually being sold, all kinds of ways to go down this rabbit hole. But you're right, candy gas is number one. It's number one in media. It's what everybody talks about. That's I don't know what the numbers are as far as legal sales, is how big Runts actually is compared to, like I said, something like Blue Dream, which I know is a huge skew right now, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Right on. How about you, Josh?
Well, I was gonna say maybe that's because we've been talking about Blue Dream for the last 15 years. I don't know. It's somehow still finds its way to the top of every single list. I think being a grower for large scale MSO, I think I'm sort of at the tail end of this trend. Most of my trends are coming back from internal commercial sales and retail sales and trying to gather what the market wants, and a lot of our footprint is out here on the East Coast. And so to Chris's point, I do think that we're trying to chase California and find those trends and get those established out here. Granted, what we're hearing still a lot from our markets is still potency driving the decision making, potency and price. And so and not to kind of steal your thunder, Robbie, but I wanted to kind of ask a question back to Chris and Ryan too around the selection is, what sort of data are you guys using to sort of forecast trends out there? Or is it really just a sort of a smell test of what's working for you guys locally and what you're hearing from, growers of your genetics in California of how you push this? I just think that's an interesting point. Juicy really prides himself on data-driven decisions, but I think for the breeders, really understanding sort of how you guys are grabbing that data and then how that affects your selection. Be interesting to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm going to offer these questions to each of you individually, but please feel free to jump in. This is an open conversation. If someone's got something to say, well, let's do it. So yeah, so Chris, so you're the breeder on this panel. So how do you reconcile with these trends in the current market, and how do you see a need? What need do you see to move in directions other than agronomics over consumer demand, and where do you see the industry leading in terms of breeding, or heading in terms of breeding?
So I think like the way, I mean, we kind of talked about we talked about the kind of fundamental difficulty of the time it takes like 2 years to stabilize a clone, to make a really great clone, at least. And when you say, hey, I'm going to make a cross, and you make seeds, and then you test the seeds and you hunt it, and then you run that genetic a couple more times. So really, we have to make a lot of different flavors, and we have to be very diverse in our offerings. And so we can't get stuck being too, oh, well, that's the trend now, let's go make that, because really we have to predict what's going to be good in 2 years. And it's also incumbent on us to, when we talk about flavors and experiences, to not go, oh, I wonder what consumers will want, but say they should want this because this is awesome gear. We like it, and the people in our orbit, the people who come to our tasting events and the people who work with us, we all go, that's the one. That's really important to us. So that said, working with kind of like super tasters and people who've been in the industry and are seasoned smokers, breeders, growers, when everyone kind of gravitates towards the same couple strains, we know we're really onto something. So that said, and going back to Josh's question again, it's very difficult for us to integrate kind of like market research or like trends in that way and then act on it, because it takes about 2 years for us to actually release a product. So we really have to be kind of ahead, anticipate what will come next.
And can you elaborate why it takes 2 years to?
Oh, I'd love to. Sure. I mean, if you to make seeds takes about 5 to 6 months. You're flowering seed plants quite a bit longer than regular plants, and then you have to dry and process the seeds. It's not a short process. If you were then to germinate those seeds immediately to pheno hunt, that takes about 4 or 5 months. So you're 11 months in. Now you find a great clone. You clone that out a couple times. That takes 3 months or so. Do another run. That's another 5 or 6 months, and then do a third run to say, wow, this is really special. That's 2 years for you, and that's wasting no time. So it's more like 2 or 3 years to do that product development for some of our, clone selections that are really big in the market right now.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up at that. I mean, when you think about it, and with the demand being for something new, it's really challenging. Ryan, so you're a nursery operator and you work with numerous breeders, and nurseries are obviously a critical step in the supply chain. So what's your strategy for navigating through all the hype and selecting cultivars that check all the boxes for consumers as well as growers?
We do a lot of seed popping for sure. And then you and I and Chris were talking about this the other day. It does take 2 to 3 years to get something to the market. Even if it's just a clone. We've got to run it in multiple different situations. Good indoor growers, bad indoor growers, outside, hoops, full term, before we're confident enough, because we have a large responsibility to our farmers to give them something that's, solid. The mule fuel, for instance, I picked that up from Gnome Grown almost 4 years ago, and we ran it for 2.5 years before we were confident enough to put it out there, and now it's kicking butt. I think the other thing was we were talking about the hype, like lemon cherry gelato. Some of these things that come out RS11, just flash in the pan type things. Instead of going for that cut, immediately go for the cross. Because by the time that thing dies out, you might actually have a cross of that available to the market. So if something comes out and it's like, you need to have this now, go to the cross immediately. You're never going to have that cut in demand in time. So you get ahead of the market a little bit. The other way is you pop a bunch of seeds, you do a lot of hunts, you have a qualified panel doing QC, smoking things, going through things. And then, between the few of us here, we get to see more expressions in 1 year than most people will their entire life. Each one of these seed runs is 6,000 square feet. And, when you gravitate to something on scale like that, typically it's going to be pretty cool because you have so many other things around you to look at. And if you keep going back to that thing over and over again, then, you make note of that and you run them over and over again. But yeah, it's going to take about 2 years to get something out there that I'm super confident with. In California, we've got, like I said, we've got indoor, we've got hoops, we've got full term, all the things. And you have to have what we call a multi-utility strain. It has to look good in flower, has to be high potency, has to have the color, and it has to wash. And because if somebody, let's just say something happens at the end of your run in week 7 or something like that, then all of a sudden now you have to freeze it, right? Well, it better wash, otherwise that whole run's for nothing. But anyways, multi-utility strains, they gotta be what the market wants in all the ways, but they also have to, wash, smoke, and be potent.
You mentioned something. No, you did. That was perfect.
Okay.
But you also mentioned something that I think is really relevant, which is testing panels. I see a lot of people do really large pheno hunts, and as a consumer, I've always had an issue with the award, being the method for selecting, the Cannabis Cup, the Emerald Cup. They're fantastic, but you just don't have enough time to trial that many varieties. So when I see one group doing a massive pheno hunt, and for instance, in some states they don't even have the ability to sample the flower until it's on the shelf, technically, right? So it has to go through the full supply chain, make it to retail, and then they can sample. I'm like, this is just an impossible way to evaluate a cultivar. Anyway, good point. Thank you, Ryan. Josh, so as you mentioned, you work for a vertically integrated company. So your selection process is quite different than the nursery distribution model. So what are the main factors that you use in choosing which cultivar to grow, considering the flower you produce is used for multiple brands in multiple markets?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and definitely different selection criteria than these other two guys. We've got our own internal metrics, our own production metrics that make sense for the profitability of the business. Generally, it's driven by, grams per square foot out of these facilities. And again, our markets are demanding, high potency flower. And so a lot of what Jushi has been growing over the last several years were inherited, libraries within these facilities that we purchased. And it's taking us a lot longer than I think myself and other growers in the organization would like to see us turn these over for newly selected and not internally selected, but new genetics to kind of fill those gaps into production. There's a real risk of doing wholesale swap outs of something new that you get in for something that you have stabilized and repeatable results from. Because if you miss, and again, Ryan made a good point of multiple runs, generally you get something new in your library and you want to take that 2-3 times through a certain room before you really feel confident in its abilities to produce and then reproduce at those same metrics. So we go slow. Being with a large scale MSO, we've got large facilities, large grow rooms. We really didn't design in a lot of R&D space. And so we've been burned by trying to push a little bit too hard and then taking out product that's needed for the market that we don't have. I think having multiple SKUs coming out of each of our GPs. So a lot of the selections are being made for flower production, but we've got CO2 extraction, hydrocarbon extraction, and solventless, and all of those different pathways and processes demand somewhat of a different product. So it's definitely been a challenge at Jushi over the last several years of really pushing hard. And, I wouldn't say that we're the leader in the space of bringing out new genetics. We're hoping to be consistent and have quality genetics on our menu all the time while we slowly start to be able to pepper in, what's new to us. But again, to Chris's point and to Ryan's, these are not necessarily new to the market. So hopefully our by the time we get to the store and we get to marketable, amounts, we're already starting to chase on the back end of trying to replace that and get something new in. So it's a little bit different from, the breeder and the nursery side. And we definitely go a lot slower than I think we'd like to, just in order to protect the business.
So really quick, just to jump in here, Compound Genetics is the seed company and breeding side, but Node Labs is a tissue culture lab, and and conducts agronomic studies for this, and can provide genetics directly to MSOs and into growers. And one thing that's really interesting, just to build on that, Josh, is having a clone, gone are the days where I have a clone and they say, whoa, so like, what is it? And you just go, it's fire, man. And that's enough, right? You need to provide some information. And like what you're saying, we've found time and time again that providing accurate, objective data on how a plant grows can save you an entire run of R&D, essentially, right? A couple metrics that come to mind that are critical are veg speed and stretch. Those seems pretty mundane or like, oh, okay, like cool. But if you're a commercial grower and you have a specific canopy requirements, having objective data to be able to know this plant is a very fast veg and very stretchy. Okay, cool. I'll only do 2 weeks of veg instead of 3. Great. This is a slow veg and a no stretch plant. Okay, great. I'll put it in my double stack LED facility, but not my double-ended HPS facility. Those type of decisions can, or like a small notes on along with this strain, we've shown with our clients that people get a amazing run on the first try, which is pretty much unheard of for a lot of new clones. So I think that's a really fascinating kind of like turn that the market's taking. If you're providing genetics, that's kind of the standard of today.
Yeah,
that's really great to hear.
A really good point.
Yeah,
the more data, the better, and it's really hard, running trials is challenging enough. So putting on the extra pressure of collecting the data during the trial is really hard. We work with an IP company, and one thing we're always trying to do is get people to run trials on varieties, but it's difficult to ask them to add a new layer of complexity, which is, look, I need the data. You need the data is what I always try to impart with the people. It's like, you really need this for yourselves. And everyone's like overwhelmed with just getting it through. But yeah, really good point. Data. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's like, we don't want to run our grows from our laptops. We want to be in front of our plants as much as possible, but really getting all that data to make a functioning system really helps. So Chris, right back to you. Just in terms of, you're a tissue culture, you run a tissue culture lab. So this adds an entire other layer to this process. So how does Compound stay ahead of the curve in predicting future market demands, considering what it takes to get a plant into culture?
Oh, that's a great question. So there's a couple techniques we do, and number one, kind of like what Ryan said, is we have to stay ahead of the curve, right? So there's a couple of techniques we do. Number one, when we're testing seed lines, we're also focused on phenohunting promising clones from those lines, and then we immediately incorporate those into the in vitro environment, which takes about 6 months. So that's another whole thing. We have a very fascinating process where we can germinate the seeds in vitro. So that's what we call in vitro phenohunting. And that's where we can shortcut or like hack that timeline quite a bit by having the backup clones for the phenohunts actually be at the lab and not at the nursery. So that's a really fascinating technique that allows us to then we find the one and go, oh my God, the 17. And then we just call the lab and go 17. They go, okay. And that's ready for commercial production with all the viroid screening and disease screening, like ready to go. But again, we try to stay ahead of the curve by when we release seeds, already having a clone to ensure that we're at least 6 to 9 months ahead of kind of just the average person we might sell seeds to. We also hold a lot of seed lines back. So if we make 20 crosses and we test all 20, we'll release 10 of those. And that might just because of various reasons, but we can often get promising clones from seed lines that weren't worthy of sales, or we just decide to hold them back. So again, a lot of it is throwing a lot at the wall to see what sticks, and then kind of like narrowing that field down. So like we have to start really wide, cast a very wide net to be able to guide, okay, where are the trends going? What do people like? And then there's always the X factor of kind of like, we didn't expect that to be the thing, but everyone's latching on to that one seed line or one clone. And we go, okay, well, hey, go with the flow. So and sometimes all that takes is a prominent rapper's smoke sesh and having them go, this is fire, and then everyone wants it. So it's very much it depends a lot on the influencers. It depends a lot of kind of serendipity as well.
Yeah, that feedback from, I mean, it's such a new emerging industry, and we don't have necessarily the normal feedback loop in the supply chain from breeder to consumer. So that those little bumps and pushes from social media really do dictate the industry, and for good and bad. I mean, there's a lot of challenges around that, and obviously people have to get the word out to get people to retail, but it is quite an interesting dynamic, to say the least. So Josh, you're the head cultivator for an MSO, as you also mentioned. And so you have the ability to interface directly with the supply chain, which is something that we're all kind of jealous of. How integrated is this process, this conversation between retail, and how much influence does this have on the varieties that you grow?
Yeah, I would like to say, the process is more integrated than it is in terms of the data flowing back and forth between the two sort of cost centers, right? I mean, they really are run as two unique businesses. We are making 23 a real change in how we're operating and how we're doing our production scheduling, where it was sort of just left to the cultivators, myself and others, to kind of run our production scheduling in prior years. We know we need to sort of align with what's needed on the retail and commercial end. So to that end, I mean, we're having meetings with, the leadership of that group. We're trying to get that feedback loop coming from retail, again, around what the demand at the retail stores is, what our commercial partners want to see on their shelf. I mean, again, I think the story remains the same. High quality, a jar appeal. Potency obviously is still sort of driving this. I think the big challenge that we're having internally at Jushi is educating our internal teams about the timeline it takes us to get sort of out of production or new cultivars to market in a way that's commercially viable. I mean, all of our process stream is becoming more and more automated, and so small little seed pop runs with a couple plants or a small amount of volume doesn't really fit the model anymore unless we take it outside of our typical process streams and handle it separately. And then if we're talking about jarring or putting Mylar bags on this product, again, how do we fit it in small enough numbers, again, where we're protecting the business but also not upsetting everything else outside of cultivation. So we're having those conversations basically weekly with the team, again, trying to be a little bit more proactive with our ability to switch in and out. At the end of the day, we don't have a tissue culture lab at all of our facilities to put a lot of this sort of on the shelf. And so we've got these out of production mothers, and we've got our mother square footage growing and growing and growing. And, that's not necessarily the most profitable part of the facility. And so really trying to get to a point where we can have a very good rotation of high yielding and good performing genetics, and then being able to pre-plan and get some new cultivars swapped in and out throughout the year, and being as proactive as we can without overdoing mother stock space, vegetative space, and sitting on things that we may or may not actually need in our production.
I wanted to jump in here as something that maybe people watching the panel don't exactly know, or a lot of people who aren't on the commercial growing side don't know, but holding these clone mothers is one of the most difficult things, especially for a large pheno hunt. That's really the limiting factor here, guys. Like cannabis is super difficult to hold clone mothers of for years and years and years. If you have a small number of clone mothers for your production, no big deal. If you have hundreds of clones that correspond to a pheno hunt that like are being somewhat neglected because like you're going to throw them out anyways, it's a terrible repository for disease and insects, and it's very, very difficult and very labor intensive to maintain all those mothers. So I think that's one of the biggest factors of why we keep cycling new genetics over and over and over again, is simply because clone mothers are hard to keep. And eventually, one of the best tools for commercial growers is you're the best tool for commercial growers to prevent insects is a big pair of loppers and kill all the plants and go, crap, start over. I mean, that's where a tissue culture lab really, really helps out because you can re-up those. But I think overall, that's one of the reasons we're kind of on this like never-ending hype cycle for new is that we're whether that is relevant now or not, that's always been a factor. You have a great clone, but you can't keep it, you can't hold it, and that's also why a lot of classic strains have kind of gone extinct over time.
Yeah.
That's what I
Yeah,
do every
dope.
day.
Yeah,
That's
leads
basically,
us right into
my
your
life
right.
right there in a nutshell. Yeah, at any point in time, we have 1,200 genetics,
Oh my God.
and maybe even more during a pheno hunt. Bring that up to like 2,000 plus. But you just that's everything I do in a day. And it's extremely hard. It's incredibly hard, and it is so labor intensive. But because we do a lot of collaborative stuff with breeders, say if you want a dog walker OG for your next cross, I got that for you tomorrow. You know what I mean? I have to keep all these elites. I hold Bodie's library. We hold multiple breeders' libraries for them. And we replace our moms every 3 months. And the amount of money we spend on testing with Toomey to do all this is mind-numbing. I'm not going to drop numbers on you guys, but it's a lot. So yeah, we have a whole separate 5,000 square feet just for elites and old stuff. And then we have another 3,000 square feet for our pheno hunting clones that we keep. And then we have to run those plants out through the hunt, decide what we want to keep. And so at any point in time, we've got 1,000 plants, which I might not even keep, but I still have to hang on to them for 6 months or a year to run them out. But yeah, it's a lot, and I enjoy it, but yeah, it's a little time consuming.
So to expand on that with Josh's situation as well, like you can't risk your commercial production plants by having a bunch of random backup clone mother moms, or pheno hunt moms, right? So I think that's where however this thing settles out at the commercial level, having commercial cultivators in their facility also do pheno hunting or like clone testing. I mean, Josh, like I won't put words in your mouth, you answer this, but like it's real, like you'd much rather be able to just run stuff that's pre-tested, right? Or have that testing happen somewhere else.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I think going back to my nursery, life at the nursery is our nursery was, we are finishers. We would buy in tested clone material. We were not necessarily growing mother stock of everything that we grew in the nursery. You can't, it's not feasible for the production facility. And so, yeah, absolutely. If we start looking at this and being able to get tested, not only, papered COAs with, viroid detection and disease, as well as, what you're expecting on potency and terpenes, and then any of the other, grow methods and architecture of the plant and how these are operating, and being able to insert those right into the program without having to do this whole mother stock backup on my own. Yes, it would be a huge relief, and also just be able to then take again some sort of non-productive, non-profit gaining spaces within these facilities and building out for flowering rooms where we can actually start to put out, a product that we can sell to the market.
Exactly.
Hey, speaking of huge reliefs, Ryan, are there any trends that you're happy to see fall by the wayside over the years? And do you see any consistent trends and cultivars that seem to be consistent? You mentioned Blue Dream earlier.
Yeah, because it's still king. Nobody wants to talk about it, like I said. I like all the trends, man. It keeps it exciting. And I wanted to go back to, I don't have my business. We don't have a direct pipeline to the market. I am working with the growers, period. And their feedback is how I gauge what we're going to do for the next, however long, months, years, whatever. And I wanted to bring up something. Are you guys familiar with the grow off, where it's one cut for 30 different people? Yeah. Well, we do something very similar in-house. Say when we send out an order to somebody, I'll throw 20 things in there, 20 different varieties, and have them grow those out. And I'll do that with 100 different farmers. And that's how I get my feedback, because it's not it's not dispensary sales or anything like that. It's, you know, it's California. There's how many microclimates here? I have to run this shit everywhere. And what I get back at the end of the year is usually what I'm going to focus on. So my feedback is direct with growers, and it always has been. But yeah, trends, I like it all, man. The more it gets, more competitive it is, more fun it is, and you really start to dial in and hone your craft and bring it on. I like it all.
That's funny, man. Yeah, it reminds me, you know, I was talking to this grower a few years back, and he only grows from seed, and he'll never grow from clone because it's a hunt to him. And he's actually was a hunter. And I thought it was interesting. It's like, you know, it's like they don't call it catching, they call it fishing, right? It's going out there and trying to catch something. And there's that challenge. And I think that it's kind of ingrained in our industry right now. For better or worse, it makes a lot of challenges for farmers specifically. But there's something about this search for amazing cannabis varieties, because cannabis is so diverse. You know, there's nothing like it. So, and I feel like that's common in agriculture. That's always going to happen. You're going to start with 5,000 apple varieties. You're going to start with thousands of different rice varieties, and you're going to whittle it down to each market only having a few. You know, but it's so what I get, what I'm hearing you guys, the wide net that has to be cast. That's the big one for me, is that you really have to just roll the dice as many times as possible, which I don't think really happens in agriculture too often other than cannabis. You know, it happens in our agriculture and R&D and breeding, and they throw millions and millions of dollars in it. But in terms of production and trying to make a, you know, an actually functioning facility, it's a lot of challenges. So, so yeah, I feel like that's a common practice, and we're just kind of doing it in dog years and hyper speed. So as a takeaway from this conversation, can each of you share some insights on how we might best balance this consumer retail demand and trends with the agronomic needs, and find a niche in the market for breeders, nurseries, and growers? How do we focus this? We all see this issue in terms of there being this kind of fragmented supply chain. How can we focus all that with keeping the diversity and addressing what everyone needs from cannabis, which is a lot? So chime in anywhere, anyone.
That's a whole lot of question.
Yeah, it's a big one.
I'll speak to that. I think and I'll use kind of a case study here. We have a cut that we popularized through Cultivated Nursery called Glitter Bomb, and it's kind of blowing up right now from Compound Genetics. And one thing we found is that it was actually selected primarily because it is so easy to grow, and it has so many positive traits for the grower. So that said, it can't be like terpless. It has to have, you know, a character, and it has to kind of pass the smoke test and in the sensory test. But one thing I find is that in this day and age, if you have a plant that has this incredible expression, but only like 20% of growers can get that expression, that means 80% of the time it's grown, it will not actually be presenting itself or hitting in the way that you want it to, or in the way that's pleasurable for the customer. However, if you have the opposite, where 80% of the time the grower knocks the run out of the park and goes, wow, oh my God, amazing, then the amount of you know, the customer is going to have a much better average experience with that clone. So I really feel like the trend, and really what Node and Compound has made a name for ourselves for, is selecting genetics that work well for the average grower. So don't have some of these like nitpicky kind of like sensitivities. And what that takes is, when we're pheno hunting, not kind of like doing the lazy version and just being like, let it grow and then we'll see how the flowers at the end, but taking notes throughout the entire process and culling plants for stuff like bad leaf health, slow veg, bad bud structure, morphology, you know, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to temperature and humidity, sensitivity to irrigation modulation. Instead, just picking plants that are resilient to all those factors, you're going to have almost all growers with all the different grow ups and setup types have success. And that's really what we're focused on. I think that's what is going to be make the trends in the cultivars of the future.
Hey, Chris, you and I were talking about this the other day, and it's like a multi-utility thing. Your great gas, first class funk, and then PCG's gushments. The reason those things got played out is because they're great all the way around. They do all the things. They're good for the grower, they're good for the smoker, they're good for your wallet. You can make money on these strains, and they're just good strains in general. And that's what's going to end up playing out here. Growers need a plant that can, grows well and it's easy to grow, but it also has to be good for the smoker. It's all the things. It has to be all the things now. But yeah, we're talking about that. Great gas is killer. First class funk is huge. And they test high, they look good, and those will always have a place. That's why we're talking about the outcrosses. It's, once something's good like that, you just start working on the crosses, you know what I mean? And keep that going for another year if you can. Especially with tissue culture, it takes 4 months to even get that thing into culture, right? And so by the time something like that comes around, you got to be working on the crosses. But yeah, that was a good conversation we had the other day, but I agree.
Yeah, don't head north, head northwest and northeast.
Yep.
Because everyone's heading for the same spot.
Yeah, well, it is good to hear, what Chris is saying about selection towards what's going to work for the growers. Obviously, we're chasing sort of the retail and consumer demand and what they say they're liking right now. At the end of the day, we do have to produce this in a lot of different markets. Ryan made a point of having to test out all these genetics in hoop houses and all these different, ways of growing it. A lot of the large MSOs, especially those of us on the East Coast, we're indoor. We're now moving, vertical. It's all LED across the board, and really understanding from the breeder and the developer of these genetics that, again, that we're going to bring in one of their pieces, one of their cultivars, and it's going to work for us out of the gate. And we're not going to have to go and have that trial and error on our own. Would again expedite our ability to provide the market with what they're looking for. I think from my standpoint, hopeful that the breeders are now, again, to what Chris said, is breeding and selecting for resistance, disease resistance, drought resistance, architecture, things that are not necessarily seen at the level at the dispensary from the consumer, but that the producer is really going to be appreciative of. And again, we're going to have a lot more pressures, be it pest or disease or viroid, coming into this crop that we haven't seen in the future. But knowing that we have good operators and breeders out there thinking about those things and selecting for some of those resistances that are showing their face early on will definitely help us get further along in this industry.
And Josh, for every finished flower imperfection, there's a corresponding problem that happened in the grow, right? And so it's kind of like understated how, okay, how does susceptibility to powdery mildew or botrytis impact trichome maturation? Well, it doesn't, except for that you had to take that down a week early to prevent it from having too much, pest pressure, which means that you couldn't get that nice finish. So each one of these kind of like actual consumer, I don't know if I like this, corresponds to some compromise the grower had to make. Another thing that's fascinating about MSOs at this particular moment in time, especially, is that I think there's very few MSOs, probably none, that each grow in every state has the same exact setup. There's different lights, there's different table sizes, there are different densities. And not that it might be because of the head growers, that might be because the inherited infrastructure. It might also be because of the laws or the compliance of that particular state. So that means that you need a plant that like can't be pigeonholed to one specific type of growing. It needs to be okay in a greenhouse, it needs to be okay indoor, double stack, LED, it needs to be good in everything. So I think that, yeah, the box checkers are, going back to the box checkers, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'll add one more thing there, Chris, too. The complexity just for the end user to know what they're getting as well. You had made mention about, why we're seeing this recycling of sort of the same breeding mothers, because it takes a long time and a lot of space to hold on to others. Well, a lot of those, unfortunately have names like cakes and cookies, and I'm sitting here in Pennsylvania right now, and it's a real challenge to get those types of names approved with the state. And so now we have consumers who, at the end of the day, may or may not know what they're actually getting, and for sure, they're not necessarily getting the name that the breeder gave it, or ultimately the person that created that cultivar.
So yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we don't have a national system. We don't have the ability to trademark plant varieties, so there's no consistency in naming. And just for the little anecdote that Noel mentioned at the top of this call, yeah, I developed a variety called Sage, and someone was growing some seeds. They had planted 10 seeds or whatever, Sage 1 through 10. Someone misread the label. They thought it said Saget after Bob Saget. They named it Bob Saget. That's a variety now. It'll be a variety forever. So we're always, yeah. So I kind of feel
That
like
was you?
that was me. Yeah, sorry. Now I wasn't the guy. I didn't pop the bean, but that was a true story.
I remember
But
getting
yeah, I feel like there was. Yeah, I know, it's hilarious, and it took a while to unravel that story. I was wondering, like, what is the deal with the Saget, because it's a terpenoline dominant variety. But so yeah, so like there was definitely like a rush for us, this industry. There was a rush to become normalized and to become just like every other agricultural commodity. And maybe we, in doing so, we kind of brought in a lot of less desirable traits like powdery mildew and stuff, and lack of resistance to virus and viroids and stuff. Because, and to your guys' point, like, it is all about the consumer. And we're trying to meet the needs of the consumer. Cannabis is medicine. It's also, it has a lot of impact on people's daily lives. But if the farmer can't grow the variety, if it doesn't make it to market, it doesn't make it to market. And that's the reality with every other crop. People want to grow cannabis in Thailand. They want to grow, varieties that are highly susceptible to powdery mildew. It just won't work. It's not about what's best for people or what the breeder loves. It's about agronomics in the end. So amazing panel, you guys. Really great discussion. And at this point, I think we should turn it over to some questions. We got some good questions coming in from our listeners, so let's just fire them away, and anyone please respond as you feel accordingly. Here's one from PM Keith Valentine. Do you guys think pure strains will come back, meaning pure sativa and pure indica?
I hope so. We're trying to push that. I mean, our company is Hayes Valley Nursery, so we're definitely gonna be pushing that envelope a bit. We got to. It's just more fun and interesting. I mean, we're kind of in a different situation out here where we can kind of do that. But yeah, absolutely. Sativas, happy weeds coming back, right, Mojave?
Yes, sir. We need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the colors. We got a lot of hybrid hues in the world.
I'd like to see people growing more 14 weekers, but the agronomics thing comes into play. But yeah, anyways, maybe there'll be a niche market for it, but I'll try pushing some stuff out there that's long flowering and see what happens.
I think pure indica, sure. Pure sativa, no. Because I think it just, again, the economics are so difficult to justify. And I think there will be some people out there, but I think it'll always be a kind of a niche kind of a niche product. That said, some of the profiles, Ryan, like we talked about, like terpenoline and some of the profiles that are a little bit like hard to find these days, but hybrids that express themselves like well-known sativas are probably more interesting to me than pure sativas, so to speak. But I think a lot of the breeding people can do with sativas to bring that flowering time down to be a little more commercially viable, but still have a uplifting high, still have a delicate and fruity and interesting nose, the typical of like a haze. I think those will definitely come back, and I'm excited to see more of them. And we're breeding some of them. So
yeah,
there you go.
I would love to see those sativas, because that's what I like to smoke and consume. Again, to the point of if it's viable in a system like ours with, limited canopy height and, trying to turn over rooms at every 60 days, it may or may not. Although I think as we get further along here and we have the ability to take a room or two in our facility and really dedicate it to a certain type of genetic that does go longer and make up for it with, the shorter harvested strains or products that are being pulled early specifically for extraction, we could get it into the production cycle, but it's a little bit further out than we'd like to see.
Josh is like,
Hey,
yeah, as long as it flowers in 8.5 weeks, is dense buds, tested 30%, is dark purple. Yeah, I'd love to grow that sativa.
Those are the metrics.
hey, Mojave, you and I are recently up in Oregon together, and we're up at Belushi's farm, and he did something where he ran an entire greenhouse, 4,000 square feet, full of Santa Marta, Punta Roja, and Mango Biche. He sold every damn gram, and they're all 16 weekers. So just food for thought on that one. Yeah, it was longer.
no,
he sold every
I
gram.
100% agree. I think that it's interesting because we just hear this so much that grower favorites, Chris, you mentioned terpenoline. Grower favorites are often not the market. Grower favorites are things that growers really believe in. I grow it at home, or this is what I do at my home outdoor garden or something like that. And to me, that's a real shame. I mean, you wouldn't hear that in other commodities where like, this are the really good grapes, but these are the ones we use to make wine. Eventually, every variety, if it has its day in the light, I do believe that it'll fetch what they, and I'm kind of mumbling through this, but in Holland, they had 4 criteria for cannabis back in the 90s. I'm not sure if it's still the same. Is it hydroponically grown? Is it organically grown? Is it indica or is it sativa? And if it was an organic sativa, they paid you way more than a hydroponic indica because they knew there was no way you as a grower could put that product on the shelf without being compensated for it. They did that. They created a market. They created demand for it. And to this day, people still will pay more for those varieties because the consumer understands it. So there's a lot of challenges. And I agree with you 100%, Chris, that there's in the hybrid world, you can bring most of the attributes of a sativa in terms of chemistry with a lot of agronomic traits that make it more favorable. But I do believe when we get to a full international market, that's when sativas bloom because it is an outdoor crop. It's an outdoor plant, and there's places in the world that it grows perfectly, does not have an issue with late harvest, or any of that stuff. And for a single season crop, we're going to see that, but we've got a long way to go before we get there. But let's all keep pushing that envelope as growers and breeders to say, look, if we like something, we really feel the consumer would pay for it as well. Let's just, there's $50 bottles of wine, there's $5 bottles of wine. Let's get there. Okay, here's one from 6 Nguyen. Can seeds carry hop latent viroid?
I'll answer this one. Yes. So there was oh gosh, I got to cite the study. There was a study that it can be transmitted at a very low rate. Seeds, a lot of people don't know this, but seeds can actually carry beneficial bacteria and fungi within the seed, as it's kind of like, and when it germinates, colonize the soil with those things. We've seen that experimentally in vitro by germinating the seed, and the gels will contaminate even though the outside is completely clean. However, we don't know if it's hop latent viroid. I don't think it's known whether it's inside the seed or on the seed coat. So if you can imagine the plant, the ovary of the mother plant has hop latent viroid, then there's now the pieces of RNA viroid on the surface of the seed. So that's why I recommend washing the seeds in dilute hydrogen peroxide. I can put a link to a protocol there. But also the seed coat is highly textured. So even if you do that, it's hard to wash the seeds sufficiently so that every little fissure is, touched with the oxidizing agent that would break up a viroid. So we don't know if it's on the seed or inside the seed. It's at a very low rate. I'm talking like less than 1%. However, that still means that you should go with breeders who are making seeds that still do viroid testing. You still need to do viroid testing on plants that you make seeds from. So in short, yes, but at a low rate.
Yeah, and it's even, I get this question a lot. It's okay to wash your seeds in a bleach solution as well, a 10% or even more bleach solution. A lot of people are really worried about that, but it's totally fine as long as they're rinsed. Good point. Okay, so this is from, and forgive me for mispronouncing your name. This is from Thaddeus Kvitok. What does the process look like when deciding the name of a strain, and how important is that name seem to be in influencing consumer demand? I think that's an important question.
Ooh. So one thing that's important when you're naming a strain is like you said, I think we talked earlier about you can't have you got to imagine the name's going to be on someone's packaging or something, right? You can't have it be something like offensive, appealing to children, like something like that. You have to kind of make a responsible decision there. And you want to have it reflect your brand as well as reflect character of what you can expect from the flower. So much of what people's smoking experience is actually influenced by the name. If your name describes flavors and experiences, people are going to be looking for that when they smoke it. So it's important to kind of like not go like, do something, name something with some intention there. So there's absolutely a lot that goes into that. That said, our official SOP for developing names, compound genetics, is to smoke the weed, sit around the table and come up with silly names until one sticks. But it's important that it's influenced by actually smoking the weed, as well as knowing it. So yeah.
I guess I'll ask a question to you, Ryan, then. I mean, what is your thought about, some of the states' mandates about how things are marketed and sold within their state, and then that causing name changes across the country and not in a consistent manner? Now hearing that, and maybe that wasn't something that we thought of, but now hearing that, and that being the reality of what's happening in mature and immature markets around the country, does that influence or change the way that influence of a naming would be, so you can actually name it and hopefully get it to stick, as opposed to having something that you really like and maybe describe the characteristics of the product, but then has to be changed in a certain market or other?
Oh man, yeah, that's quite rampant. Name changing just to fit the market, especially with large operators in California, is extremely common. If they like a genetic, let's be honest, a lot of the stuff looks the same right now. A lot of it's purple, a lot of it, if you put 10 different varieties out there, most people won't know what it is just by looking at it. So the name game is extremely important. And people are changing the name just to fit what they think their market might be. What else was I going to say? I was going to say, Montana, Mojave and I were talking about this. They have a different rule where if it's under 34%, it's for rec. And if it's above 34%, it's for medical. And so there's some name changing going on up there. Say if they have the same strain, but it tests high one round, tests low the other, they're going to name change it. So there's a couple unique situations there. But yeah, people are always going to do that. It's never going to go away.
Yeah. You hear stories of, guys talking to distro, like, what do you got? Well, I've got 100 pounds of runts. Oh, runts, we got love runts. Oh, well, I also have 100 pounds of such and such. I'll take it. And it's just like, come on, man. That it's such a mess, and it really screws up. The consumer is the one who suffers the most. They go in and they're so susceptible. We're all consumers. We're all susceptible to marketing influences, with the food we eat and the products that we buy. And I really think that when the dessert name trend took over with cannabis, you can't beat that. When cannabis is so complex, the aroma of cannabis is so complex, there's no one thing you can lock down on. It's all over the place. So it's gas candy, but there's also savory, there's spicy, there's funk, there's all kinds of things going on in there. But when you identify the one thing that we know we all love, which is dessert, you really win the consumer over right away. So yeah, it's a challenge. And like my thing is, like, I love berries. So like, I love berries. I love blueberries, raspberries. I'm a big berry fan, but berry flavored cannabis tends to not resonate with me as a person. So like as a consumer, if I didn't know more, I just keep going back to berries because I love berries and they got me. I'm a berry guy. But, you know, so it's really a challenge. And I think, you know, ultimately this all gets figured out with trademarks, because trademarks and IP protection are how the industry protects that. So if you develop a grape variety, you license that grape variety, you trademark the name, the trademark lives forever. You can actually have a patented variety can have multiple names, but someone can't just steal your name and they can't just change the name that's in the license agreement. So it really, it helps build a functioning supply chain. So we got a long way to go.
So Mojave, really quick, in other crops as well, there's a cultivar registry, and there's certain standards you need to pass, because right now kind of anyone can make seeds at home and then be like that's the thing. So like a cultivar registry is probably pretty necessary at this point for cannabis. And I wanted to quickly announce that we are working on like a genetic verification program for that. So I'm very excited for being able to kind of check it until we have a way to actually verify what the genetics are. This is never going to really fix itself.
Yeah. And there has to be a body to do that. And that's kind of the whole thing. Someone has to draw a line in the sand. I know some of the genomics companies in the past kind of gave the illusion that what they were trying to do was to define what a particular cultivar was, but then someone has to be the judge of that. And that's a challenge, because if you look at just cultivars like Sour Diesel, OG Kush, Blue Dream, all the foundational varieties are still in dispute as to who did it, where did it come from, what are the actual lineage involved. So it's really complicated. It's trying to unravel, you know, hundreds of years of breeding and whatnot. All right, I've got another question. We're kind of getting towards the end here. We got a question from Trista Rowan. Trista asked, I'm curious, do you do any qualitative consumer research panels, focus groups, and or individual consumer interviews in the R&D process? Or does it tend to be more informal, i.e. smoking with friends, chatting with retailers, etc.? If so, what's most beneficial?
For us, it's all mostly informal. We're all smokers, and it would be cool to do something like that at some point, to hand out, you know, like I think it's been done before. Take 6 strains to the dispensary and get everybody's feedback, or get part of a program like a wine club type thing. That's on the horizon for sure. But for right now, it's fairly informal. But we've got a lot of people that know what they're doing and like weed, and so we make some pretty good decisions based on our current circle.
I find it's a great question. It's pretty challenging. One organization that I think is worth kind of like plugging here, the Ganjiers, who Kevin Jodry has kind of pushed and originated, and they're kind of like super tasters that are actually going to be able to objectively rate those. But we've done some, so to answer that, we do mostly informal. Like we have the jars out, we have smoking. If you join our Discord too, you can get invited to these if you're in California. But you kind of have the jars out, you invite people to smell and smoke and talk about it and everything like that. But we found like when you have literally the last thing people want to do when they're high is like fill out a form, right? So it's almost like the biggest buzzkill ever. So it'd be like, hey, how's it make you feel? And it's like, I don't know, confused, because now I'm filling this form out. So it's almost like this kind of like paradoxical activity. So you kind of have to have it be a little bit more free form, but also try to have it be as standardized as possible. But we're definitely working on that, on the sensory portion a lot. It's very important.
Yeah, I think from my standpoint, again, we're not doing any breeding in house. When we do have sort of new selections rolling through the building, something that's not in our production, yeah, obviously we try to get it out to people's hands. Not the easiest thing to do on the retail and commercial side, again, in terms of getting that feedback loop to come back. So discounts or specials. We've thought about, we're trying to develop some internal breeding programs. We've talked about it being a part of a way to sort of monetize the R&D that's happening, right? If you can have a separate brand name or package line that carries something new and have an ability for the end user to sort of interact with the breeding and the selection process, where they do have a direct line to communicate, what they liked or disliked about it, to then be a part of that feedback loop. But that's not something that we've started, but I do think it'd be a good way to bring in some of the outside consumers.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, with the issue around the competitions, it takes a long time to evaluate each cultivar, in my opinion. It's kind of like I need like a week. I need to try it. I need to stop trying. I need to try it again, go back to it and compare it to other cultivars, and then really give you, a proper evaluation. So, and it's to me, it's what it's all about. To me, cannabis is about effect. I mean, ultimately, like, if it tastes good and if it makes you feel good while you're consuming it, that's great. But ultimately, to me, it's the effect that's most important. And I'd like to get back to that. I do think that as growers, we've gotten so good, and the cannabis flavors are so dynamic now. But I think the consumer is kind of forgetting along the process that it is really about the effect. In order to get there, you got to really try the variety in the right set and setting, which is the other challenge. So, an amazing variety for a specific attribute consumed under the right set and setting, you'll have completely the wrong, experience.
Mojave, really quick, there's a question by Jay Podorowski about casual smokers too, and I wanted to kind of mention that, like, when we do these events and when we have these smoke sessions, it's, we're going to invite like super smokers like Jimmy Devine of LA Weekly, who will spot out and is usually excited about some of the most like putrid, gassy, like really kind of like heavy level and connoisseur level smoking experiences. So you can know that if he selects that one, you're going to get the guys who are like really into the scene and stuff. But we also need to value casual smokers and people who maybe aren't as seasoned for that like very intense smell, or really don't want that like ultra potent. And I think he's kind of like famously reviewed one of our strains like, oh my god, I thought I was gonna have a heart attack and die, it was amazing. I was like, oh my god. Like most consumers would be like, oh my god, it's horrible. Right. So our CEO Lauren Avenius does a women in weed event as well, where we invite influencers and also like our staff and stuff like that to specifically say, what do the ladies in the room like? And it's interesting to see that there's a little bit of a different preferentially flavor profiles and experience profiles compared to men and women, experienced smokers, inexperienced smokers, and all the other people in between. So it's important we listen to all those different voices.
That's right. That's really a good point, Chris. There is no demographic for cannabis. Cannabis is for everyone. I firmly believe that. But in the early days of the Cannabis Cup, you definitely see dudes coming over, guys 20 to 30, they were heavy smokers, just a totally different thing. And I think that they do that kind of does, for better or worse, dictates the cannabis gene pool. They have the loudest voice in the room. They're the ones who are influencing everyone. So yeah, it's really important to remember that there's a lot of different people that need a lot of different types of cannabis. It's just a plant like any other, but man, is it really, really complicated. I mean, the plant-human relationship with cannabis and human beings, I think, is probably as complicated as the thing can get. So trying to unravel where genetics are headed or where they should be is just such a big question, and we need more people involved. We need institutional help. We need help from the state. We need help from everyone. Well, that being said, you guys, this was a really amazing panel. I think we really covered a lot of important bases. You guys are all awesome. So I have had a great time. Thank you, Cannabis Business Times, for letting me moderate this. And now I will turn it back over to Noel.
Thanks so much, Mojave. Thank you so much for, helping put this together and coming up with a lot of the questions and facilitating this really important conversation. I do want to mention, so unfortunately, we had a lot of questions coming in. We weren't able to get to them. We could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. One thing, there were quite a few questions, or a number, on HPLVD. We will be talking about that, not to shamelessly plug Cannabis Conference, but it is there to help cultivators, especially with challenges that they're facing. One of them is HPLVD. There will be sessions at the conference on that, as well as the cultivation roundtable that we're having will address that. So growers will be at tables and can talk to each other about how they're mitigating it, trying to prevent it, all that things. So, and shout out to Josh Melman, who is on the Cannabis Conference Advisory Board. So he's one of the people who helps us put together a program that's really, touches on all the important things that growers are facing, and as well as retailers. So thank you all. Chris, Ryan, thank you both so much for being here. Love to have you. Appreciate all your insights on this. And just a reminder that the webinar will be archived, so you'll be able to view it later. And one last shameless plug for the conference. Our opening rates expire Wednesday at midnight. So get your savings, get registered by then. And I guess that's it. Thank you all so much. Appreciate your time. And I hope everyone who attended enjoyed it, and appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys.
You.
Take care.
Thanks.